Good morning. It's my pleasure to see everyone who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform. We continue our operation. My name is Olga Atamanova. Today is day 624 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor, and now we will be talking about the specifics of border crossing during the martial law, and we will be talking about liability for illegal border crossing. Joining us in the studio today are Yuriy Kovalchuk, head of the Department for Combating Cross-Border Crime of the Administration of the State Bodyguard Service of Ukraine. Also joining us is Valery Boyko, deputy head of the department, head of the Passport Department of the Border Control Organization, Directorate of the Administration of the State Bodyguard Service of Ukraine, and Andrii Demchenko, spokesperson for the State Bodyguard Service of Ukraine. Good morning, gentlemen. So let's talk about this. Mr. Andrii, let's probably start with discussing what's going on in our borders for the time being. What do you document? What is the intensity of the passenger flow? Good morning, everyone. So today's topic is the rules of border crossing and detection of the schemes that are used by perpetrators to illegally cross the border. Well, perpetrators, let's call them like that, because for certain categories of persons, the crossing of border is prohibited, save for the rules outlined in the government order number 57. So talking about the statistics, within October, the State Bodyguard Service processed about 2,900,000 persons. The passenger flow intensity fell 7% compared to the previous month. Like, there was a half of that amount entering Ukraine and a half exiting. 85% of those crossing the border were the citizens of Ukraine, and in October, as I said, the intensity was lower than in previous month of September, and comparing to the summer month, the intensity was even lower. But until this moment, since the beginning of the year, more than 30 million people crossed the border, and that data shows that we have 6% increase comparing to the previous year. However, the percentage of people entering and exiting the country was almost equal, so there was no prevalence of people either entering or exiting the country, unlike during previous years, when during the first month of the full-scale invasion, we remember those lines in the checkposts in the border with the European Union and in the border with Moldova. And just like earlier, more than 50% of the total passenger flow goes through Poland. This is the way it happened during the last year. It's exactly the same this year, and we have to understand that in the border with Poland there is the biggest number of checkposts. Well, if we don't just omit the border with Moldova and only talk about the European Union countries, so also the transport vehicles intensity grew 6%. More than 6 million of vehicles were processed both for exit and entrance to the country. Talking about the categories of the citizens who cross the border are mostly women, kids, and men over 60 years, because generally during the martial law the men are prohibited to cross the border, save for a number of categories that are outlined in the rules for state border crossing of Ukraine. And we have a large number of people who were rejected, who were refused to cross the border 43,000 Ukrainian citizens were refused to cross the border on the way out of Ukraine, and they were rejected for a number of reasons. And first of all, because they did not comply with the conditions to cross the border. And here, obviously, we mostly talk about the male citizens of Ukraine. So let's probably talk in more detail about those categories that are not allowed to leave Ukraine. We understand that the biggest such category is the men aged 18 to 60 years. So we see there's a lot of discussion of this process in the society. The men continue living. So who is allowed to leave? Who does leave? And what are the violations that you document in that area? Well, the microphone, please. Good morning, dear colleagues. Well, really, as you know, on the 24th of February, the first day of the full-scale invasion, the martial law was implemented in the country upon the order of the president, and there was a limitation implemented. The restriction for the men aged 18 to 60 to leave the country. Obviously, this restriction is not absolute, and to standardize the categories of population who are allowed to leave the country, the rules of border crossing approved by the order of the government number 57 was amended, and I would like to mention that since the 22nd of February, 22 amendments were made to this standard. And the categories of the citizens who are entitled to leave the country are strictly outlined there. So first of all, those categories include the people with disabilities of all three groups, the persons, the men who have disabled spouses, whose parents are disabled, or the persons who take care of the disabled parents, also the foster parents and parents who have children with disabilities, also the men who are recognized unfit for military service with the exception of the military registration, or recognized as such who are timely unfit for military service with further medical examination. Also the men who have minor kids below the 3 years in amount of 3 or more, the foster parents, the adopters who take care about the orphan children below 18 years, the men whose spouses are in military. Also those categories include the drivers who drive who transport the humanitarian cargo, and the drivers of the business entities which have trans-border transportation licenses. Also that category included athletes of relevant levels and teams who are part of maritime vessel crews, air vessel crews. Also the permission was given to certain category of the government official of central bodies and different types of business entities for the purposes of business trips. So I think that I've outlined the key categories, and for each of those categories there is a list of documents that confirms their status and thus allows them to cross the border. It will take a lot of time to count all of those documents. You can get familiarized with the list of relevant documents on the website of the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine. In the section of crossing the border, there is a comprehensive list of all of the documents for each category. Well, I wanted to ask you about the second category, the government officials, of the representatives of the local governments. We understand that if they go on a business trip, they are allowed to leave. Yes, the Order 69 dated this year stipulates that the list of such people should be provided to the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine. Those people are added to the database, and as they cross the border, we see that there is an index, and they leave the country based on the documents about such foreign business trip abroad. So let's stop on the fraudulent illegal schemes that are used by the perpetrators to cross the border. Well, my colleague will tell you more details about that, but I want to emphasize that all of those categories that I've listed, in any single of them, we were identifying the people who were trying to illegally leave the country using or counterfeiting some of the documents. For example, if people were counterfeiting the certificates of birth of their children on the paper carriers and India application. Also, there was a lot of documents, counterfeit documents about the people unfit for military service. So it's a broad range of documents that could be counterfeited. Yes, let us continue. Good morning to everybody. Well, talking about the illegal schemes used by the perpetrators, assisting to that category of the men aged 18 to 60 to help them leave the country, to making a way around the restrictions. So what are the most popular schemes and how the State Border Guard Service counters this illegal activity? As my colleague Valery has already mentioned, we may divide them into those crimes that are committed in the checkposts and those which are used in the green section of the state border. So talking about the checkposts, the most popular, the most widespread scheme is the use of counterfeit documents, those that provide exemption for such persons and entitle them to leave the country. And we were facing a lot of documents that were issued or are supposed to be issued by the conscription centers about the military registration, deregistration, postponing of military service. Another category of documents are those issued by the medical institutions, so-called medical commissions. Many documents many documents turned out to be of a specific nature. For example, when people have residence permit abroad, which people were using the counterfeit documents to confirm the existence of 3 or more kids. Sometimes they don't even neglect such things as counterfeiting the documents, such as certificates of death of their relatives. Or sometimes the relatives hide their male relatives on the way out of the country. We remember that case when a citizen of Hungary was hiding her lover in the trunk of a vehicle, and there was a scandal right on the check spot. In this way, also the drivers of the cargo vehicles may assist the people to leave the country, hiding the perpetrators in the trunks, in the cargo compartments, or in the cabins. So it's an actual scheme, for example, for the checkpost Mayaki, where we observe the assistance by the drivers of the large cargo vehicles, hide 2 to 3 persons in their cabin or in the cargo compartment, and they try to enter the territory of Moldova. And probably the most widespread scheme was adding of details, personal details, to the system of transportation safeties and security service. And this is when we've paid attention and analyzed those licensees who exercise such activity. And in cases of some of them, we've seen some systemic violations. When people get employed by a business entity, they leave and they never come back to Ukraine. And with the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we've initiated 607 criminal cases, 50 last year and the rest this year, in relation of such licenses. And on a periodic basis, we informed the Ministry of Infrastructure about such violations and the Transportation Safety and Security Service. So, upon the initiative of State Border Guard Service, the access to Schlak system was seized for 122 business entities. So those licenses are restricted the access to the system, and in fact they cannot exercise trans-border transportation services. Another type of illegal activity related to smuggling of the people fit for military service is their smuggling through the green section of the border. We may say that the organizers of those schemes are the denizens of the settlements along the borderline, and we've seen such a tendency that those criminal groups or physical entities who were related to smuggling of tobacco to the tobacco products to the countries of European Union, with the beginning of the full-scale aggression, they gradually switched to smuggling of Ukrainian citizens abroad. And talking in numbers, the organization of illegal smuggling, upon the facts of illegal smuggling of Ukrainian citizens through State Border Guard Service initiated 958 criminal cases, 57 this year alone. More than 1,000 persons were served notes of suspicion based upon the Article 122 of Criminal Code of Ukraine. This year there were 918 persons served such notice of suspicion, and 125 citizens who were organized in such processes were convicted and brought to criminal liability. Unfortunately, not all of them got the real sentences. I can only mention 25 cases, 25 persons who were convicted to prison sentence more than 5 years. Regarding schemes, I also would like to mention that the perpetrators get more and more sophisticated. They study the tactics that we use to counter those processes. We see the organizers using the modern information technologies, using anonymous messengers. A fraction of organizers coordinates the activity from abroad. We reinforce the cooperation with our foreign partners, and we hope for fruitful cooperation and joint documenting of processes of criminal nature. Mr. Yuri, getting back to the Schlak system, is being very vividly discussed in the society, as well as the violations. Is there a clear algorithm for those who violated and added some unfaithful information to this system as to restriction of the access or restriction of ability to add any such details? Are those business entities being deprived of such a right to add details to this database? Yes, this mechanism does exist. We've studied it, and there are ways to influence this situation. We still don't know how efficient are they, but the mechanism is as follows. As the persons cross the border, those who are added to Schlak system, specifically those who leave Ukraine for the first time, we've organized a systemic work to verify such facts, and I have to say that with the beginning of the year, almost 8,000 persons were identified who were trying to illegally cross the border, or those who had no reasons to be added to that system. In those cases, we informed the law enforcement agencies, who further on within the criminal investigations investigate facts like that. On top of that, to prevent those processes, we inform Transportation Safety and Security Service of Ukraine. They are supposed to organize the work of the commission, which is supposed to review those abuses of Schlak system. After we performed an analysis, we've identified more than 2,000 such licenses who admitted such violations, and after informing our units, the units of State Bodyguard Service, this information was taken into account during the investigation of cases, and 122 business entities were restricted the access to the Schlak system. We continue our work to make sure that other business entities better think twice before they resort to any such violations. There are many licenses that are just shell companies that were created to fulfill their criminal schemes. The people were leaving the territory of Ukraine, and the business entities were shut down. So yes, we were documenting cases like that. But if we talk about certain experienced transportation company who worked in the transport logistics market for certain period of time, they are in no way interested to support any such things. Thank you very much. Before we proceed to the questions from the floor, I would like to ask probably you, Mr. Valery, about another category. The students who study abroad, those processes and procedures were amended, but what is it like now? So for the time being, this category of students, regardless of the fact whether they study abroad or in Ukraine, they are not allowed to leave the country. It's identified by the paragraph 5.7 of the Order 57. So before this legislation is amended, such people are not allowed to leave the country. Dear colleagues, your questions please. Anastasia Rakuta, Ukrinform. Sir, do you have information about the number of Russian citizens who crossed the Ukrainian border since the beginning of the full-scale invasion? Entering or leaving the country? Entering. Well, we have to understand that for the citizens of the Russian Federation, there was a visa regime imposed to enter Ukraine, and for the time being, a little bit more than 70 citizens of Russian Federation obtained a visa which allows them to cross the border to enter Ukraine. However, not all of them exercised these rights so far. So less than 70 citizens of Russian Federation who obtained the visa entered Ukraine, and even the existence of visa is not a final or ultimate reason to enter Ukraine, because on top of that they have to confirm the purpose of their visit to Ukraine or the goal of their visit to Ukraine. Do you have any more questions? Ludmila Trufan, TV channel Kiev. What is the situation for the time being in the Polish border? Is there still blockade going on by Polish transporters? Well, talking about the situation with the blockade of movement in the Ukrainian and Polish border, it's still complicated in 3 checkposts. Since 6th of November, it's Rava-Ruska, Yagotin and Krokivets checkposts. From 6th of November, 13 o'clock, we started observing complications in the movement in those 3 checkposts, but it was more related to the direction of entering Ukraine. So the participants of that strike, they stated that they would let 1 or a couple of vehicles per hour. And starting from the 6th of November, we were documenting that the movement was fully blocked in the checkpost of Yagotin and Krokivets and Rava-Ruska. On those checkposts, there was quite an intense flow of vehicles entering Ukraine, but after a day, the Polish party also refused any transport vehicles to enter Poland. So there is an intense movement currently only in Krokivets in the direction of leaving Ukraine into Poland. Within the first hours of the intense accumulation of the cargo vehicles, well, there was no such accumulation. We started documenting the lines only starting from 8 o'clock in the morning, because more and more vehicles were coming to the border to cross it. However, they were stumbling upon this blockade by the participants of blockade. So there was around 1,700 cargo vehicles in the checkpost of Yagotin alone. So the strikers only block the road for cargo vehicles. Yes, it's only for the cargo vehicles in those 3 checkposts. And in Yagotin, there are only cargo vehicles and buses led through, but the organizers of the strike, they mentioned they don't block the way for passenger vehicles and buses. Mr. Andrii, did you have a communication with your colleagues on that side? Do they see any way out of the situation? Well, in fact, the Polish border guard service cannot influence any actions of the participants of the strike. We can only exchange the information about the current situation. They also report about the condition of the lines of vehicles which expect to cross the border, but Ukraine generally reacts to this. We remember that even there was an address to the Polish party by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Ministry of Infrastructure, and Ministry of Infrastructure was asking the Polish party about a joint meeting with involvement of all interested parties in order not to let such things happen, but we already see that they do happen. This is why we want to find the way out of this situation the soonest possible to make sure that the movement is unblocked. But as the Ministry of Infrastructure mentioned, the participants of the strike did not provide any official requirements to the representatives of Ukraine. We can only see their demands in the social media, that they demand cancellation of transport visa-free regime. They require special lanes for the empty vehicles and access to the Schlak system. Well, according to your forecast, how long will this blockade take? Well, we would like it to end as soon as possible, but unfortunately the organizers mentioned that such a strike can last maybe until the end of the year. So within this year, what was the number of Ukrainian citizens who were trying to illegally cross the border in all ways possible? Well, since the beginning of this year, in the green section of the border, there were attempts undertaken by more than 7,000 persons. During the martial law, this figure amounts to 16,500 persons. In the checkposts, using the counterfeit documents, it's about 2,500 this year, and 7,000 in total during the effect of the martial law. So this year we see a tendency to decrease of that number, but if we analyze it day by day, the attempts are continuous. It's about 30 attempts per day. Well, some days it's more, some days it's less, but it's about 30 attempts per day, both in the checkposts and in the green section of the border, but it's way less than it was during the first days of the martial law, because back then we detained groups of citizens, 80 to 90 persons. Karina Bondarenko, Ukr.ua, do you expect to make amendments to the procedures on border crossing? Maybe we should let some men through letting some men through the border. Well, what we can say that the State Bodyguard Service does not formulate the policy for crossing of the border, and all of the amendments made to the order number 57 are made upon the initiative of different central bodies. Like, for example, for the athletes, it was in the best interest of the Ministry of Sports and Youth, and the passage for the maritime cruise and airline cruise, for example, it was initiated by the Ministry of Transportation, but talking about even comprehensive permit for all of the men to leave the country, It should be done upon the initiative of the central government. Well, thank you very much for this information. We want to thank the journalists for the interest to the topic. We want to thank the security and defense forces, thanks to whom we can hold events like this. And glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes.